Tá, era. É.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the fourth and final video in this snowblower refurbishment series. I got the augers back from powdercoat. We got snow coming tomorrow. It's time for reassembly. So before we get to it, just give you a quick look at these nice shiny mirror black finish powder coated augers. Say that 10 times fast. Alright, I think reassembly is probably going to go pretty smooth, and it'll probably go pretty quick since we got most of everything done and it's just a few bolts to put everything back together. And we'll get to it and see how we do. Alright guys, so once we get to the assembly, we're going to notice that the augers, they're actually not one and the same. They are quite different, and they do have a proper side that they go on. So a way to remember whether or not you have them on the right side is that the auger should point towards the middle of the snowblower, in essence pointing into the impeller housing as to where you want that snow to be going. So you notice on this left, which is actually the right auger if you're standing behind the machine, is pointing in towards the middle of the snowblower, okay? Same way as on the right side now to us. This one is pointing towards the middle of the impeller housing. Alright, if those were reversed, the snow would be brought to the outside edges of the bucket instead of being brought to the inside. Alright, so we'll get back to the assembly. The next step in the process, we're going to replace the actual impeller back into the housing, onto the drive shaft. Alright, simple enough. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to assemble the auger assembly on the floor, and that includes placing the bearings for both ends. So I'm just going to remove these bolts that I had as placeholders during the whole sandblasting and powder coating procedure. That was just to keep the treads clear of any paint or anything that would prevent the screws from going in. Alright, so next we will assemble the augers onto the middle drive shaft. Alright, once we're there, we're going to lay it back down on the floor, like so. And now that you have the augers put back onto the drive assembly, it's a good time to reinstall some shear pins. So that's what we'll do next. And this bolt, you may have to just rotate it into place to get it to follow all the way through. And once you have it through, just place a nut on the end. And these are 10mm nuts and 10mm bolts. So you'll notice here with the shear bolt, there is actually a kind of a slot made for the head of the bolt. And so as a result, you don't really need a wrench on this side here. You only need to use something on the nut side. So for that, I'm just using a 10mm ratchet. So keep in mind for your shear bolts as well that they're not meant to be fully tightened down so that there's no movement in the auger. there actually has to be a little bit of movement to initiate that snap if it does actually get occluded and need to shear the pin. So that should be good. And we'll show you from the other side. Alright, and now that we're back over on this side, I'll just show you how much slack I've left in the shear pin so that it is actually able to form that initial inertia which can shear the bolt. If that was fully tightened down, it would have a hard chance getting the movement necessary to actually crack the bolt in the case of jamming. But under normal wear and tear, that shear pin should hold just fine. And now we'll just repeat the process that we did on the other side, starting with the bolt from the inside towards the outside, capping that off with a nut and tightening down with that amount of slack that we looked at earlier. And there we go, we have our little bit of slack left, so we're done with that one. And now that we have the shear pins reinstalled, we're just going to reinstall these end bearings. The cupped side goes in towards the drive shaft, the flat side towards the outside edges of the machine. Alright, and let's proceed now to lift the auger assembly back into the housing. So remember this wire, we're going to feed that back up through. There we go. So that is seated in there. And if you recall, there is a pin, washer, and cotter pin that need to go back in. So now we'll replace that pin, washer, and cotter pin that go in the back. Alright guys, so I cut the camera there briefly and we're back now with the pin through the drive shaft as well as the auger assembly. I was having a bit of trouble getting that pin to pass through, so what I had to do was actually take the auger assembly back a bit because there is a hole in the drive line that needs to line up with the pinhole in the auger assembly. So when I put on that auger assembly at first, I didn't line up those holes, so we ended up with the pin not being able to pass through, obviously. So anyways, now that I've lined it up, I got the pin through, so I'm just going to put on the washer and the cotter pin and we'll go from there. Alright, and there we go. That's the pin and the washer installed. Alright, next step, I'm going to attach the shear pin for the impeller and the drive shaft as well. I'm going to start with this one by lining up the impeller with the shear pin hole. And I'm going to start from the back and feed the bolt forward and rotate it into place. And we're going to put the same amount of tension on this as we did the other shear pins. So we're going to have 3 shear pins. There are 3 points of weakness where if anything jams up, they should be able to break. And there we go. That's how much play we want to have left in that. Alright guys, we're back again. I just had to cut away and fix one mistake that I did, and I'll share it with you guys so you don't repeat it. Basically, what I thought that main pin right there that's on camera right now, when I thought that was in, it wasn't. So I had the shear bolt in, and I started trying to adjust the augers to start lining up the sides and get that support bracket on top lined up. Anyways, the auger assembly came off of the drive shaft because it wasn't pinned in properly. So through it all, I figured out that the drive shaft actually receded into the snowblower a little bit, just enough so that the holes wouldn't line up. So what I had to do was haul the drive shaft out and then wiggle the auger assembly onto it gently so that it would slip over it properly, and then it did finally line up. The only negative side of all of that, besides the extra effort that it took, was that my cotter pin for that pin broke. It was really hard to get out. It ended up snapping. So for now, I just got a piece of stiff steel wire wrapped in around the pin, and that should hold it okay as well. So with that done, let's get back to installing the bolts on our auger assembly support bar. Alright, so next we're going to tidy up this cable that we took off earlier and that we sent back up through the hole, because we're going to bolt this auger assembly support arm back onto the bucket, back onto the tunnel. Okay, so for these we're just going to be replacing the nuts and bolts, the 4 in the corners there of the auger support bracket. And one thing we're remembering from disassembly was that there was definitely some thread lock around there, so we're going to be reapplying that as well. Okay, and now we'll just tighten those down. Alright, next I'm going to reattach this wire. Pretty straightforward. Green to blue, black to black, as we noted during the disassembly. And those just pop back in place, and I'll replace this little grommet to keep the wire from wearing against the metal. Like so. And now we'll just tidy up that wire that we reattached. Make sure the ends are together, good and tight. Then we have one support strap here to tighten up. And then we fold this down, bundle these together, and we have another one right here. There we have it. That should be pretty close to where it was before we started. So, since we're over here, we might as well replace the side cover now as well. So you'll remember here we have our headlight housing for the support bolt for that, and that was a 12mm if I remember correctly. So this side looks to be lined up okay. Let's check the other. Alright, everything looks to be lined up fairly well. So I'm going to tighten down the headlamp now. Closer. Okay, so now we'll just do the 4 bolts that hold on that cover. So these are 10mm. We'll just apply some thread locker and put those right back in. So now with all 4 of those started, we'll finish them off and tighten them up. And there we are, that's the cover replaced. Now let's finish off the auger. So you'll remember from disassembly of the auger that we have a combination of 10mm bolts, which we'll do first, followed by the final 12mm in the middle. One thing I'd like to show you of why I like magnetic bowls. You can put your bolts in upside down, and when it comes to thread locker, you can just do all of them easily at the same time. So you don't need to stop for each individual one when you're dealing with multiple. Alright, so we got our thread locker on. Now we'll go and reinstall those. So we'll start off from the inside. Rotate the plates into the proper orientation. We can stick our magnetic bowl right there. And get things going. There we go, that's this side. Let's do the other. And finally, to finish off, we have our 12mm bolts, and those will be going in each end of the augers. Again, we're going to apply some thread locker to both of those. Alright guys, so now that reassembly is complete, refurbishing is complete, it's one thing left to do, and that is test it out. So without further ado, let's try it out. So that looks like a good result to me. Let's call this project complete. And here it is guys, finished product, all done, ready for the snow tomorrow. So she's got a nice shine on her. I hope that this actually helps with the clogging issues and everything that was happening before. Either way, she's looking as good as new, and I think she's ready for another winter. So to those who watched this series, I appreciate your views and your time that you spent watching. So I hope you guys have a great winter. Hopefully I'll come up with some more videos for you guys throughout the season. But otherwise, we'll see you next time. Peace.